So as most of you can see, my name is Lisa Williamson. I'm the Compliance and Training Director for No Letting Go Inventory Management, which is a national inventory franchise. For those of you that haven't heard of us, which I'm sure most of you have, we have approximately 80 offices now across the country, from Scotland all the way down through to probably Plymouth, actually, where Alsu is the furthest south I think we have at the moment. And I'm also the senior partner at Independent Adjudication Services, so I'm a qualified adjudicator. Used to do some adjudications with the TDS, Tenancy Dispute Service, and now I do independent adjudications for various organisations, including one of the main nil deposit schemes. So to kick off, have you ever asked yourself, why is it that landlords always seem to lose out at tenancy deposit adjudications? It can often seem the way. And I used to be a letting agent myself with Andrews, actually, for about 10 years. So I do know from past experience, it can seem that it always goes against the landlords. But hopefully I'll be able to dispel that myth a little bit later on. Why can't I just rely on photographs and video evidence? What constitutes fair wear and tear? That age-old question, you know, what is fair wear and tear? What should be an allowance for the tenants as opposed to what constitutes damage? And finally, the real age-old question is, what does clean mean? And for those of you that have been in this business for any length of time will know that what a tenant thinks is clean, or what often a tenant thinks is clean at the end of the tenancy, and what we consider is clean, are often poles apart. And so we'll look at methods of avoiding that sort of disagreement and how we can all be on the same level playing field when it comes to cleanliness. So evidence is key. I mean, part of this webinar is to show you how to best avoid having any disputes in the first place. And obviously, those of you that have dealt with disputes in the past will know how absolutely time consuming they are, getting all the information off, photocopying information, downloading emails, screenshots, and so on, to send off to whichever deposit scheme you might be using for a dispute. It is really, really time consuming. So the best tact is avoidance. And so the first part of this webinar will be on getting everything in place. So hopefully there won't be a dispute in the first place. So evidence obviously is absolutely key, and the written word is still considered paramount, even with all the advances of technology and videos and photographs, etc. Unless you've got the BBC film crew following you around doing an inventory with their expert lighting and so on, it's often still difficult for an adjudicator to pick up something that you're trying to show them on a photograph. Whereas if something is in writing and the tenant has signed to their acceptance, or they've acknowledged the inventory, then that written word will stand. So really important to have good level of detail to inventories, supplemented by clear quality photographs. And then of course there's the importance of the tenant's signature or agreement to the inventory. And of course during COVID that's changed quite significantly. It's almost unheard of now to have what we call an accompanied check-in, whereby an inventory clerk would walk around with your tenants and show them any imperfections that they've picked up, and then they would give the tenant the opportunity to pick up their own imperfections or any issues, maintenance issues. Nowadays, most of that is done online, but it's still really important, even if the tenant doesn't physically sign the inventory, to show that they've acknowledged it and they are in agreement with it, possibly subject to some of their own amendments. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later on. Cleanliness, so the standard of cleanliness at the check-in and check-out is paramount. We'll look at cleanliness in more detail, but the vast majority of disputes that go to formal adjudication will have an element of cleanliness to them. In fact, that figure is 85%. So 85% of disputes that go to adjudication will have an element of cleanliness to them. It might be that the garden needs, the lawn needs cutting and the oven needs a clean. Or it could be there's blue tack on the walls in bedroom 3 and the property needs cleaning throughout. or it could just be the property needs a good end of tenancy clean. So the level of detail to the checkout report is also just as important as the inventory, and the independent inventory clerk's opinion is considered as fairest. And there's nothing in law to say that a landlord or an agent can't do their own inventory and their own check-in, but where it's contentious and where it's he said, she said, unless the landlord or the agent's inventory has got really good, clear photographs to support their findings, then all three schemes will give more credence to an independent professional inventory clerk's comments at both the inventory time, inventory check-in, and at the checkout. So where do you start? First off with the inventory, as I mentioned earlier, prepare that to a professional standard. And for any of you that would like a copy of a sample inventory, No Letting Go can provide that to you, just so that you can see what the level of detail expected is, how to lay it out, what needs to be included, and also what doesn't need to be included. You know, you don't have to include, for instance, whether there's a normal TV aerial on the roof, although we would include whether there's satellite dishes. So that sort of thing can be very interesting for you. So please just drop us a line and we can send out a sample inventory to you, no problem. So it will list obviously the contents, decor, fixtures and fittings, and also the level of cleanliness and the quality of the contents. So the quality of contents is very important, because if a landlord's carpet has been ruined by the tenants at the end of a year's tenancy, if, for instance, that's a student type property and the landlord's put in lower end carpet, then of course that carpet will probably only be expected to last a year or two. Whereas if it's a high end property with good quality carpet, then that carpet might well have been expected to have lasted 5 years plus. So when I'm training all of our network, I always say to them, forget location, location, location. When you're compiling an inventory, it's all about condition, condition, condition. It's not often, you'll be pleased to know, it's not often that we find that tenants are sort of rolling up carpets and walking out with the carpets on their shoulders, or pinching the washing machine, or anything like that. It's rare for them to purposely steal items from the property. Most disputes are around the condition, and whether that condition is consistent with fair wear and tear, or whether it's come about because of the tenant's negligence, misuse, etc. So also remember the gardens, sheds and garages. If they're part of the premises, then they are part of the access areas for tenants, and therefore they need to be included in the inventory. And there's many a dispute over meter readings and keys. So again, really important to get the photograph of the meters, including the serial numbers, and a list of the keys and a good clear photograph of the keys. Tenants will argue until you're blue in the face, even when you've got a photograph of the keys. They'll still say, oh no, I wasn't given all of those. I only had one chub, and there's not 3 as shown in the photograph. But if they've signed or acknowledged the inventory and there's a photograph of the keys as shown, then they are expected to give all those keys back. And again, I can't emphasize enough, good, clear quality photographs. We see quite a lot at adjudication where the checkout reports have got very small thumbnail photographs, and the agent or the landlord will be saying, look at photograph 25A, you can see this. And we'll be looking at photograph 25A and we can't see what we're supposed to be seeing. It might be paw marks on a back door, it might be cobwebs, it might be dust. And sometimes photographs are so small, even when we enlarge them, we just can't see what we're supposed to be guided to look at. So it's really important. So what does clean mean? As I mentioned earlier, it's very, very subjective. And what we do at No Letting Go actually is we have 6 levels of cleanliness. But I've just simplified that for the webinar today. So, clean could be from professionally clean, which is in this first photograph here. It could be something that's regarded as an average domestic standard in this second photograph. It looks worse than it is actually. That's just some burnt on carbon deposits there, which a professional clean would remove, but a average or even a good domestic clean is not going to remove those. You need certain chemicals to remove that type of staining. And then finally we've got not cleaned, which is this one at the bottom, which when I did the levels of cleanliness for no letting go, I did want to put in that the last one being, you know, filthy dirty, but our CEO wouldn't allow that. He said that would be a little bit antagonistic. So our lowest form of cleanliness is not cleaned, and clearly that oven at the bottom would fall into that category. So move-in is really important. As I mentioned earlier, we used to do pre-COVID and also pre the Tenant Fees Act. There used to be, you know, that pretty much the norm in London certainly was that there would be an accompanied check-in. But when the Tenant Fees Act came in June 2019, of course we couldn't charge the tenants the move-in or the check-in fee anymore. So that kind of fell by the wayside. And then with the advent of COVID, even more so, the norm now is not to have an accompanied check-in, obviously for social distancing purposes, etc. But you must remember that most damage will either occur at the move-in or at the move-out. And particularly this time of year when it's muddy and tenants or their removal people aren't taking their shoes off, aren't putting down protective covers for carpets, and then they send the inventory back a week later and say, oh, guess what? There were muddy marks all over the white carpet. And of course, you know, from your inventory, the photograph should show that actually the carpets were not muddy and marked a day before the tenants moved in or on the morning that the inventory was compiled. So ideally, in an ideal world, we would get the tenants to sign the inventory before they move in. That's pretty difficult now because where we send the inventory to the tenants, we have to allow them a certain amount of time to read and understand. And the guidelines from ALA, the Association of Residential Letting Agents, is that the tenants should have 7 days to read the inventory, make any amendments and send it back to you. So if that's the way that you're going, then it's really important that you follow up the tenants. Don't just send them the inventory on the day they move in and then just send them an email on day 7 saying, we haven't heard from you, so it's taken as read. You must show that there's an audit trail that you've reminded them about the inventory. So day 2, day 3, be sending them a reminder, hey, you know, hope you moved in safely and well, but you know, do remember you must get this inventory back to us by 7 days, otherwise it'll be considered as accepted. If they do send you amendments, then make sure you check them. You know, don't just think, oh, that's great, got the inventory back, that's a tick box off, I can fling that into the filing cabinet. Have a look at the amendments that they've made. Often it's maintenance stuff, you know, the tap doesn't work properly in the bathroom, or the water flow is too slow somewhere or other, or a door creaks when it's opened. Those sorts of things are absolutely fine. They're maintenance issues. But anything to do with damage, as I mentioned, stains to carpets, they might have had a party, they might not be following COVID rules, they might have a party on Saturday night and a few cigarettes gets dropped, and then they say that there are existing cigarette burns. Those sorts of things, you need to go back hard and fast. No, we do not accept your amendments. The photographs quite clearly show that there were no cigarette burns, no carpet marks, etc. So it is common for landlords' claims to fail because they can't prove either that the tenants were sent the inventory or given the opportunity to make amendments. So that audit trail is really, really important. So checkout, we would advise that you write to the tenants 2 weeks prior to the checkout to advise them of their responsibilities. Although they may have given a month's notice or you may have given notice, if you write sooner than 2 weeks, they're not really focused and not concentrating on what they're supposed to be doing with their move out. And so that letter probably won't get read. So 2 weeks, we would like to hope that 2 weeks before they're moving out, they are booking removal people, etc., and making plans. So that's the ultimate time to send them a letter, just reminding them of what they're supposed to do, that everything's supposed to be clean, back in the same place as it was at the start of the tenancy, light bulbs, gardens, the usual. And good news for letting agents, landlords and inventory clerks is that obviously during COVID, we don't need to give the opportunity to the tenants to be present. And those of you that have done checkouts with tenants following you around will know it's not the easiest thing to do with them breathing down your neck and telling you all the reasons why the property isn't perfect. You know, the plumber broke the bath panel, the handyman broke the curtain rail, whatever it might be, and you're trying to concentrate. So yeah, during this time, because of social distancing, nothing wrong with saying to the tenants, drop the keys off, we'll go the following day to do the checkout. And when we do the checkout, when I'm training our network, I always say our job at the checkout is to register change. And that change might be conceived by us or by the tenant as being an improvement to the property. But if the landlord hasn't given permission for that improvement, in inverted commas, then they then will most likely have the right to charge the tenants to put the property back into its original condition. Some of you will raise a wry smile at this. Tenants sometimes try to conceal damage. They'll put a bag on a work surface, or they'll put a neatly folded tea towel next to the sink. Lift that tea towel, it may well be hiding a burn to the work surface. Lift their handbag or their briefcase, it might be hiding some sort of damage. I had a tenant years ago who didn't move from the spot next to the fireplace in the lounge when I did the checkout. I went upstairs, I went downstairs, I went out to the garden, came back in. This tenant was still stood on the spot. And when I finally asked her to move to come and sign the report, in those days we had handwritten reports, she moved away, and I went and looked at that area. As I mentioned, it was next to the fireplace, and there was a huge patch of burnt molten wax where a large candle had obviously fallen off the hearth and damaged the carpet. So that's the extent that they will go to. So don't be fooled. And also tenants can be quite lazy sometimes. So if they don't want to get their washing machine picked up by the local authority or to take it down to the recycling dump, then they'll put it in the garage or the shed. So do make sure you look in all areas. Checkout report needs to be, again, just as clear as the inventory, with good supporting photographs, and to list any cleanliness damage issues, any issues with the gardens, meter readings, etc. And again, not that I'm trying to plug no letting go at all, but adjudicators will put more emphasis or give more credence to checkout reports that have been carried out by independent inventory clerks rather than the landlord. Obviously, the landlord is always going to be biased towards their property, and the agent is working on behalf of the landlord, so they can be, not always, but they can be more inclined to be a little bit biased towards their landlords, which is why an independent report is much preferred. So yeah, here's a couple of nasty pictures from our No Letting Go library. I'm pleased to say we don't get these very often, so I have picked the extreme ones. I have seen a kitchen very similar to this one at the top here myself at a checkout many years ago. And, you know, they always say, don't judge a book by its cover. We tend to sort of put poor students all get lumbered in the same band as, you know, they're not going to look after the property. And often they do. Mums and dads come and help clear up. And actually, in many cases, student checkouts can be fine. The one that I did, where the kitchen was honestly very, very similar to this, turns out that the tenant in that particular property was an eye surgeon working at Moorfields Eye Hospital, which was pretty scary because you think if they live like that, then I certainly wouldn't want them too close to my eyes. And this garden was nice and flat at the start of the tenancy. The tenants let that one go to pieces. I don't think it had been inspected by the agent or the landlord for a couple of years, so there was quite a shock there. So support the photos with accurate written descriptions. Don't just rely on the photos. And if you are submitting photographs for adjudication without a checkout report, it's absolutely vital that they are date stamped. If you just submit a load of photographs with no date stamp on them, an adjudicator can't tell whether they were taken during this tenancy, they might have been taken 2 years ago, and therefore they won't, in most circumstances, they won't be accepted as reliable evidence. So cleanliness, the main cause for disputes, and this is ideally, in an ideal world, have the property professionally cleaned at the start of the tenancy, including the carpets and the oven. I know that, you know, for some of you that are agents, your landlords won't allow you the money to do that. I do appreciate that. But wherever you can, if you have the property professionally cleaned, from there on in, the tenants can always be charged for it to be brought back up to a professional standard at the end of the tenancy, because it's in black and white. You've got the receipt to prove that it's professionally cleaned at the start. And if you are able to do that, then add a photograph of the cleaning receipt to the inventory, or provide a photograph of the cleaning receipt to your inventory clerk, and they can add it to the inventory. And again, once the tenants have signed or acknowledged the inventory, they've accepted that it's been cleaned to that standard. One thing the tenants must be given the opportunity to do is to clean the property themselves to a professional standard at the end of the tenancy. You can't just say to tenants, well, sorry, it was cleaned by Molly Maids at the start, and therefore you've got to have it cleaned by Molly Maids or by our contractors. If they've cleaned it to the same level as your professional cleaners, then that's good enough. And one thing is that dirt is never considered as fair wear and tear. However long the tenancy, and I've had tenants say to me when on move out, well, you know, we've been in the property for 5 years, so, you know, what do you expect? It's going to be dusty to the skirting boards, and there's going to be, you know, grubbiness here, there and everywhere. No, there shouldn't be. The wallpaper might be lifting, the paintwork might be yellowing, but the dust shouldn't be there if it wasn't dusty at the start of the tenancy. So moving on to fair wear and tear or damage. So this is a really tricky topic, and you know, I've been on courses a whole day on what constitutes fair wear and tear, what's damage, and the things that an adjudicator will look at when determining whether, you know, a tenant should be charged or not will be the original quality and condition of the items. So coming back to the carpet, you know, was that a good quality carpet? And if so, it shouldn't be heavily worn at the end of, say, a 12-month tenancy. And also the age of the damaged item. So we've got an example here of a chip to a UPVC windowsill. That's not something that would normally be regarded as fair wear and tear. There might be surface scratches to the windowsill. Okay, that sort of thing will happen, but that looks like a tenant has deliberately or negligently caused a hole to the windowsill, and that would be classed as damage. Of course, the length of tenancy has to be considered, and also to bear in mind that everything within the property will have a lifespan. So the best that a landlord can expect from their decor, for instance, is 5 years. But that's given that you're renting to professional sharers, you know, a couple of professional sharers who are out working most of the day, and therefore there's going to be less wear and tear on the property. If you're letting to a family, then the length of time for decor comes down to about 3 years, because obviously if they've got pets and children, there are going to be inevitably more marks, scuffs, etc. to the decor. And then we look at the type of tenants. So I've already mentioned, you know, professional sharers, not expected to have too much wear and tear on a property over a 1 to 2 year tenancy. Families, more wear and tear. And also students, and again, don't want to tarnish them all with the same brush. I'm sure quite a few of you are ex-students, and some of you may have looked after your properties very, very well during that time. But generally, you know, again, you've got 5 or 6 students in a property, the decor, the carpets, etc. I would say you'd be looking at a year, 2 years maximum before replacing carpets, redecorating the whole place. And also when you're submitting, if you are submitting a claim for adjudication, the adjudicators don't really take into account what you personally think any more than what the tenants personally think. They're looking for an outsourced opinion. So, you know, if the tenants have damaged something like this, the windowsill, it is fairly obvious that that is a tenant issue if that wasn't chipped at the start. But other issues, perhaps they've damaged a work surface, a wooden work surface, it's much better to get a contractor's opinion on what's caused the problem and what the repair or maintenance required is, rather than you specifying that. And then the last bullet point here is consider the average lifespan of items. And some of you will have seen lifespan tables before. If you haven't, I will show you one in just a moment. And this just goes back to, you know, what is the average lifespan of each item within an average rented property. So another thing that landlords must consider is betterment. This can be quite hard, particularly for new landlords that haven't let before and the tenants, you know, caused significant damage to the property. The landlord can't expect new for old. It's not the same as having an insurance claim where you've had a leak in your house and your wooden flooring has been damaged. The insurance company wouldn't come along and say, well, your wooden flooring was 5 years old and it was only expected to last 10 years, so we'll give you 50% of the replacement value. That's not how it works with traditional insurance, but that is how it works with adjudications. So yes, if the tenants have damaged a wooden floor in a lounge area, let's say, and it is considered already to be 5 years old, or you can't prove that it was new last year, then an amount will be deducted for depreciation. And also the adjudicators will look at, well, can this item, you know, they've damaged the wooden flooring, quite a common dispute actually, and some of you I'm sure have had this, is stiletto heel indentations in wooden flooring. The jury's out a little bit on that one. And when we took legal advice on this, the lawyers said, well, really there ought to be a clause in the tenancy agreement to say that tenants agree not to wear stiletto heels on wooden flooring. But the lawyers have also said that that could also be determined as an unfair term in a consumer contract because it's kind of impeding on the tenant's private life. But you know, if you are going to claim for stiletto heel indentations, ideally there should be a clause in the tenancy agreements where the tenants have agreed not to wear stiletto heels, especially the men. Okay, so moving on to lifespans. So the average lifespan is 2 to 5 years for carpets, 4 to 6 years for furniture. But, you know, these are only averages. If your furniture is from Argos and it's in a student property, I would say that term would come down to 2 years, maybe 3 years. Lawnmowers, somewhere between 1 and 3 years. Most people don't leave lawnmowers. Kitchen appliances, somewhere between 2 and 5 years. But, you know, if you're at the top end of the market and you've got Miele or Smeg type appliances, then the manufacturer's warranty will say how long that lifespan is. I mean, I know that with most Miele appliances, it's approximately 10 years. Toasters, kettles and lamps, you know, small electricals, somewhere between 1 and 3 years. And painting and redecoration, say this one tends to be the most controversial, maximum of 5 years. And, you know, I know that landlords will often say, well, I've lived in my house for 7 years, Lisa, and it's never needed redecorating. You know, and I'm sure, you know, that's true. And there's areas of my house that I haven't decorated for over 5 years that still look fine. But the rules are different for rented properties. And this is what landlords, you know, need to be working to. Every 5 years, they need to refurb. So moving on to invoices, receipts and estimates, where you are making a formal claim at adjudication, really vital to have receipts and estimates. I was looking at an adjudication yesterday and the landlord wanted to claim for 2 scatter cushions. They didn't have a receipt or an estimate, but they did a screenshot. They showed a screenshot of a couple of cushions from Dunelm at £10 each. That was fine. You know, it's not necessary for smaller items to always have a receipt. But certainly, you know, once you start charging something over £25, then you need to have some sort of evidence to show that cost. And if they can't be provided, then again, put in your form with the adjudication company as to why you can't provide the receipt. Sometimes there's a genuine reason. Sometimes it may be that a landlord is claiming compensation rather than replacement, in which case there wouldn't necessarily be a receipt. And estimates and quotes obviously won't be given the same credence as receipts and invoices, because an estimate or quote by very nature means that the landlord hasn't actually had that work carried out. That's not to say they're not still entitled to claim, because if the tenant has damaged the walls, let's say, and the landlord has put in an estimate or a quote, the tenant is still liable for the damage to the walls, even if the landlord decides that they're not going to have that work carried out. Use local companies. We do get the odd, not very often, but you do get the odd landlord that will send a receipt from Manchester for redecoration of a property in London. And adjudicators will look at that and they'll think, well, hang on a minute, that will, ring an alarm bell. Why they use somebody in Manchester to repair their property in London? Perhaps that receipt isn't genuine. Perhaps that landlord's relative runs a decorating company in Manchester and that's where they've got that receipt from. So do use local accredited companies wherever possible. And for large quotes, having to have the property redecorated or rooms redecorated, whole rooms redecorated, preferable to get 2 quotes for major works. Cleaning charges. So as I mentioned, cleaning forms 80% or has an element of 80% of claims. And landlords can get really carried away with cleaning charges. So just make sure that they are relative to the cleaning that's required. So you might have a 4-bedroom property, but the checkout report only says that the kitchen needs cleaning. So if you then put in a £400 bill for cleaning when it's only the kitchen, obviously that's going to be looked at and it will be knocked down by the adjudicator to just be fair and reasonable in relation to what's required. And what becomes most contentious is where the inventory says perhaps that your property was cleaned to an average domestic standard at the start or a good domestic standard, and perhaps at the end it's been poorly cleaned, but you're charging for a full professional clean. Obviously that won't be allowed because it wasn't professionally cleaned in the first instance. So if the total professional cleaning cost, for instance, is £250, and the property wasn't professionally cleaned throughout at the start, it might be that an adjudicator says, okay, well, I'll give you 50% of that cost because it wasn't professionally cleaned at the start, which is why I said right at the beginning, wherever possible, do get the properties professionally clean, and then there's no argument. It's quite hard as well for landlords to justify their hourly rate. And it's not uncommon for a landlord to put in their dispute form that they spent 2 days cleaning at the property after their tenants moved out, and that they are a solicitor and their daily rate is £1,000, and therefore they want £2,000 for their own time in cleaning the property. And some of you might laugh, but I have actually dealt with claims such as that. So no, get the cleaners in to do the work, don't charge your own hourly rate, and then get the receipt or the invoice to send in to as evidence. And adjudicators will use average market rates and geographical data for professional cleaners. In fact, for all contractors. Obviously, a contractor in the heart of London, heart of central London, is going to be more expensive than a contractor in a rural area, or places like Birmingham are cheaper than central London. So they will look at local data to make sure that your charges are fair and reasonable. So these are the guidelines that adjudicators look at or work to. So the tenant is innocent unless proven guilty. So it's very much down to you to provide the evidence, which is why the inventory, the checkout, property visits are really important to submit. If you haven't got an inventory, then unless you're claiming for rent arrears, of course with rent arrears, you don't need an inventory, but anything other than rent arrears, you're going to be very unlikely to succeed with a claim if there's no inventory to prove the original condition. And as I mentioned, inventories, property visit reports, checkout reports are all very important. They allow for depreciation, so looking at that table of lifespan that I just showed you, it works in the same way as when you buy a brand new car. If you go and buy a brand new Rolls Royce and drive that off the forecourt, probably immediately it's lost 25 grand. I don't buy Rolls Royces, I don't know how much they are, but straight away it's lost a big chunk of money just by driving it off the garage forecourt. You don't lose such a great chunk of money, you'll be pleased to hear, with lifespans in rented properties, but you must factor in that will be deducted. Remember your photographs and video evidence. Adjudicators don't particularly like video evidence. It doesn't tend to be very clear. And also it means that they've got to scroll through to, 5 minutes 32 or wherever you're leading them to. So they much prefer to have photographs. They will only award amounts for repair or redecoration for the affected area. So for instance, bedroom 3, your tenants have plastered one wall with blue tack and you're claiming for the whole room to be redecorated. You won't get an award for the whole room. You'll only get an award for that one wall to be repaired and redecorated. And similarly with carpets, if the tenants have burnt the carpet, with cigarettes or maybe an iron scorch, they're quite common. Those of you that have been in the business for a while will be aware that tenants quite often prefer to iron on the floor with an iron and an ironing board. Then it will only be, normally you'll get an award for compensation for the carpet. So for instance, the average award for an iron scorch to a carpet is somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 pounds. A cigarette burn somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 pounds per cigarette burn. And the decision is final and binding on both parties. So if you agree to go down the route of, it's called ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, then you are bound by the decision. So I thought I'd put in this slide, which just as it says, most common reasons for landlords' claims to fail. And it goes back to slide 1, do you ask yourselves, why has my claim failed? And often it's because of the poor quality inventory or the checkout report, or it could be because of poor quality photographs, or as I mentioned earlier, photographs have been submitted separately and they're not date stamped, so we can't see when they were actually taken. If the standard of cleanliness isn't listed to the inventory, so it's still not uncommon for us to get inventories that will say that the items are in good condition, but it doesn't mention cleanliness. So condition and cleanliness are two different issues. You could have a brand new table that's got a layer of dust on it because the builders have been in, so it's dirty, brand new table that's dirty. Or you could have an old table, heavily marked and scratched and dented, but it's professionally clean and it's polished and shiny. So do remember that condition and cleanliness are two different items. If the tenants haven't received or acknowledged the inventory, say if you haven't got an audit trail to show that it was sent to them, they'll say, what, me? I never got an inventory. So it's down to you to prove that they did receive it. And as I mentioned earlier, your landlords and agents' reports might be considered biased if the photographs aren't clear. If the photographs support what you're saying, then that's great and that's all well and good. But your photographs are poor, or you don't submit photographs as an agent or a landlord, then again, it might be trickier for you to prove your claim. Lack of receipts and estimates, inflated estimates, be reasonable. As soon as you put in an inflated estimate, an adjudicator is well versed in what the average prices are. If you put in and some agents have said to me, well, you know what, Lisa, we put them in inflated quotes because we know we're going to get knocked down. But actually that just makes an adjudicator think, are they trying it on? And then they'll look more closely at the whole claim. So it's actually much better to be fair and reasonable in the first place. You're more likely to get a successful outcome. And the last one, this has become quite common actually, claims for reletting costs. So where the tenants have left early, might be with the landlord's agreement, might not be, but they've left before the end of the tenancy. They are still liable for their rent until such time as the property is relet. So you can still continue to charge the rent. They are liable under the contract, but they're not liable for the landlord's reletting costs because you're not allowed to charge fees to tenants in the first place. So need to be careful on that one as well. So I'm just going to run through why we would advocate the use of no letting go, and then I will go through an adjudication with you. It's only a short one, so don't worry, it's not a long, laborious one. So as I mentioned at the start, we now have over 80 offices across the UK, including Scotland and Wales. Because we're a large organisation, we have a consistent high level of service and detailed reporting wherever your property is located. And because each office is their own business, they're looking for their business to be as successful as possible. So they will deal with, wherever possible, late notice bookings, those last minute ones where the tenants have come and flung the keys in on your desk and said, we're off, and you haven't got a clue that they're meant to be going or that they intended to go. They will bend over backwards to accommodate those sorts of scenarios. And they will also offer key holding services. So if you need the keys held, perhaps from the checkout to the new inventory, they'll offer that service. We have a very fast turnaround of reports. Our tech is very, very up to date, and most reports can actually be sent from the property because they're done on a tablet, although most of our offices prefer to just, upload them, check them through to make sure there's no errors. And so certainly they're back with you within 24 hours. If you want us to, then we can assign the liability on the checkout report. So most landlords and agents do take us up on this. So rather than you saying to the tenants, we think you're responsible for the broken toilet seat, or we think you're responsible for the cleaning, it's us that's saying that. And so you can remove yourself from that conversation, say it's not us, no letting go, they're the professionals, they've determined that it's your liability. Similarly, we will say that things are landlord's liability, and to be fair, a loose toilet seat is normally considered a landlord liability at the end of the tenancy, unless the property is being wrecked by the tenants and we can see that they haven't taken proper care. A statistic that we're very proud of is that less than 0.1% of no letting go reports end up at formal adjudication. Last year, we did over 75,000 reports. So we're really, really proud of this statistic. And I believe it's because the reports are so detailed that there's very, very little wriggle room for landlords or tenants, actually, which makes, those of you that are agents, it makes your lives a lot easier. And also, as I mentioned, the tech is superb, and we have a super simple online booking platform. If I can follow it, you can follow it. It literally is, log on, put the details of the property in, tick what service you want, and press save, and that will then come through as a booking to us. And you can follow that booking all the way through from it being booked to it being done to you getting the report. And you can access all of your reports for all of your properties at any time, 24/7 on that booking platform. So it's a great audit trail for you. Okay, so that was a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm just going to stop sharing this screen for now. And I'm just going to have a look at the chat to see whether there are any questions as yet. So bear with me just one moment. Okay, no questions as yet. So what I'm going to do now, hopefully, is I'm going to share a live, not live because I've done it, but an adjudication with you, just to give you an idea of what the evidence was submitted and how that was interpreted. And in the meantime, if you do have any questions, then please do put them into the chat and I'll come back to them shortly. So bear with me just one moment. Okay, so here's a recent adjudication. You can see the matters in dispute. No surprises here. General cleaning, oven cleaning, redecoration, and some damage to a freezer drawer. The landlord claimed £335 odd, and the total award was £176. So the first part of the adjudication will be a summary of the information submitted. So I won't go through this line by line and say we can send this out, just drop us an email and we'll send it. Well, in fact, don't drop us an email, we'll send it out to all of you anyway. So we just look at obviously the tenancy agreement is the most important document. And that's the first document that an adjudicator will look at even before the inventory checkout property visit. Because if what the landlord is claiming for is not included in the tenancy agreement, then unfortunately they won't be able to make a successful claim. So with independent adjudication services, we actually will note which clauses we have specifically referred to. So in this instance, the landlord claims £83.40 for end of tenancy cleaning, and they've put in a cleaning invoice for £69.50. That sounds odd, but it's not that totally odd. They'll often claim more than the actual invoice states. The landlord had an inventory that they compiled themselves, and it had no photographs, and it hadn't been signed by the landlord or the tenant, and therefore it wasn't considered as reliable evidence. The landlord also submitted a checkout report, which they compiled themselves, which states that the property required cleaning. And the report includes numerous non-date stamped photographs, again, not being signed or accepted by the tenants, and therefore not relied upon as satisfactory evidence. And in here we put, as the inventory has been prepared by the landlord rather than a third-party professional inventory clerk and has not been signed by the tenants, the written word can't be relied upon. However, it was noted that the tenants have not suggested that the property wasn't cleaned to a reasonable standard at the check-in in their dispute form. So for each adjudication, both parties can put in their actual evidence, whether that's receipts, documentation, etc. But they also complete a form of reply with their side of the story. And in this particular instance, the tenants hadn't said, they hadn't disputed that the property wasn't cleaned at the start. So in this instance, we took the decision that whilst the checkout photographs were not dated, they hadn't been challenged by the tenants as not being genuine, and therefore it's reasonable to consider that some further cleaning was required. But because we were unable to establish the standard of cleanliness at the start, because the inventory had no photographs, hadn't been signed, then a 50% of the 50% award was made of the original claim. They claimed 83.40 and they got 41.70. Oven cleaning. So the landlord in this one claimed £45 for oven cleaning. But they only, if you look here, they only required cleaning of the lower oven door at the end of the tenancy. And the photograph showed that the oven itself was clean. It was just the inside of the door needed a wipe over. The check-in inventory showed the door to be in clean condition. Checkout report shows extensive grease splashes to the interior side of the door. So the landlord had claimed £45 to clean the bottom oven and the inside of it. But because the checkout report only said that the door needed cleaning, an award was made of half of that amount, £27.50. And you can see here that the adjudicator has gone online and has found what the price for an average oven clean in the Bedfordshire area is, which was actually more than the landlord's quote. It was £55. So they've actually been awarded 50% of the higher quote. So the next one, the landlord wanted £150 for redecoration to repair the walls, remove blue tack, treat stains above the radiator and paint the walls white. And the invoice didn't specify what had actually been done. It just said, oh, actually the invoice details repairing walls, but the invoice didn't specify how many walls were repaired and repainted. It was a little bit vague. So of course we go by the checkout report and noted that redecoration was required to the lounge and bedrooms, but there was no specific detail. It didn't say that all walls needed to be redecorated. It didn't really say why they needed to be redecorated. And the photographs just showed some minor scuffs and marks, which were determined as fair wear and tear. There were dark markings above a radiator, but as the tenant had said in their claim form, or their response form rather, they were caused by the landlord's radiator. And when we looked at the photographs, you often see these dark markings above an electric radiator. And of course, the tenants can't be held liable for damage caused by the landlord's fixtures. But it says here that there were numerous blue tack stains to one wall, which the tenants have not disputed upon. And furthermore, they've not suggested that these stains existed at the start of the tenancy. And therefore, on the balance of probabilities, it's reasonable to presume that the tenants used blue tack. But because we didn't know how many walls were affected, we awarded £60, being kind of the average cost to repair and redecorate one wall. So again, that shows why it's really important to have a detailed checkout and detailed invoices. And finally, the fridge freezer drawer was damaged. Again, landlord claims £56.72, but the invoice was £40 plus £6.99 for delivery. The freezer drawer was shown as damaged on the checkout. The tenants acknowledged the drawer was damaged, but they state that this was due to the freezer being faulty and unable to regulate its temperature, which resulted in the build-up of ice, which again does occur. But the tenants need to evidence that, and they didn't submit any evidence to show that they had written or text. Even if they sent a screenshot of a text to their agent or landlord to say that there was an issue with the freezer, then they probably would have been let off this. But there was no evidence to show that there was a problem with the freezer, and therefore, as it says here, the tenants did not submit any evidence to show that it was brought to the landlord's attention. Clauses 3.1 and 9.1 of the tenancy agreement, one of them must have said that they are to report such problems, and one would say that they're responsible for the repair. And therefore, they were awarded the full cost, £40 plus the £6.99 delivery charge. Where they got £56.72 from, we're not quite sure. May have been that the agent put on a service charge or an admin charge, but that wasn't explained, so they didn't get that. So I hope that's given you a little bit of insight. Those of you that haven't seen an adjudication before, that will give you sort of a little bit of an insight as to how us adjudicators think and come to decisions. So I've got a couple of questions here. Bear with me 1 second. So one of them, if the inventory is not signed, but we have a disclaimer on there, will this affect the deposit dispute? And this comes from Gurge. If the inventory isn't signed and you have a disclaimer on there to say that the tenant acknowledges receipt and they understand that they've got 7 days or however long it is to return the inventory to you, that's fine, but you must show evidence. You must have an audit trail, an email audit trail, to show that the tenants were sent the inventory and that they had at least one reminder. So at day 3, you sent an email to say, by the way, just reminding you, if I haven't got this back by day 7, it will be accepted as read. And on day 7, best practice is to send another email to say, just to confirm the inventory is now accepted as read, as we haven't heard from you. So don't just purely rely on that sentence, Gurge. Do make sure that you've got an audit trail. And Tony has said, do you have experience of disputes going to small claims court? Not recently, I don't, Tony. I've been in the business, I'm sad to say, for over 30 years. And prior to the deposit disputes legislation coming, or deposit legislation coming in 2007, yes, I went to court several times on behalf of landlords as a letting agent to claim for damages. And it worked pretty much in the same way. You know, a judge would ask for all the evidence. They wanted the factual evidence. They still will. And so it will work pretty much in the same way. I would say that the only reason why you should choose to go to a small claims court rather than adjudication via the deposit schemes is if your claim exceeds the deposit. So let's say, for instance, you have £1,000 on deposit and your claim is for 2,000, then the deposit schemes can only award up to 1,000. So you're better to go to the small claims court. But if you go to the small claims court just because you think you're going to get a better outcome than ADR, alternative dispute resolution, you'll probably find, particularly now with the courts being so overloaded, you'll get short shrift from a judge. They'll say, why are you wasting my court's time when you've got a perfectly adequate adjudication system in place to deal with this? So I hope that answered your question. Let me have a look. Marie, do you have any suggestions or advice regarding disputes when the checkout report shows a stain to a carpet and the tenant agrees to deduction for a carpet clean? This is a good one. And the professional clean doesn't remove the stain, and the landlord then requests a contribution for the carpet to be replaced. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's quite a common one. And to put it in a nutshell, the landlord can't claim twice, which does sound very unfair. What you really need to do, Marie, or all of you in that situation, is get your professional carpet cleaners around, perhaps get them just to test a small area of the stain to see whether they think it's going to lift. And if they say it's going to lift and it doesn't, then basically you want your money back from the cleaners, and then you can claim a proportion of the cost of replacing the carpet. But if you say to the tenants, no, we're going to have it cleaned, and then it doesn't lift, you can't then go back to them and say, oh, well, we tried that, that didn't work. We're going to charge you, I don't know, £50 for cleaning, and now we're going to charge you another £50 for compensation. Doesn't work in that way, unfortunately, as unfair as that may seem. So a question here from Y Spark. If the tenants reject the check-in inventory, what is the next move? Wow. Okay, we don't get that very often. It has happened on occasions. What we do is, at No Letting Go, is if a tenant, obviously it's more difficult now because the tenants have got the keys and have moved in, because we're not doing an accompanied check-in. In the first instance, if we were doing an accompanied check-in, and the tenant refused to sign the inventory, it does occasionally happen, then we will take the keys back and we won't allow them to move in, and we refer that back to the agent or the landlord. But given COVID, that they've already moved in and now they're refusing to sign the inventory, you've got to ask them why they are refusing to sign it. Obviously, that possession is 9/10 of the law. They're already in the property, you can't go and throw them out. So you just need to ask them why they're refusing, and if they don't respond to that, then just send them an email to say, you know, I appreciate that you haven't signed the inventory. I'd like to know why. You haven't given any reasons, and therefore this will still be used in the event of a dispute at the end of the tenancy. And as long as you've got that email thread, and particularly if your inventory is well prepared and got good supporting photographs, then the adjudicator will still look at that inventory and will, you know, in most cases, they will probably accept it and just regard the tenants as being quite unhelpful and obstructive. Somebody here, B. Milson, what happens when the landlord rejects the checkout report and says it's poor quality as it doesn't show certain things, and the landlords claims to have found things when they visited the property themselves? Again, that does happen from time to time. And whilst we are very, very proud of our statistic of 0.1% going to adjudication, occasionally things are missed. Certainly with no letting go, anything that's brought to our attention within 7 days, we will deal with very promptly. And what we will always do is, and what any inventory company should do, is go back round to see that property as soon as possible, immediately, basically, to ascertain what has been possibly overlooked. When it's a longer period of time, then it becomes trickier, because you could have had contractors going in to do repairs. We've had a case recently where a dispute was raised, or an incident was raised, about 3 months after the tenants had left, and a crack had appeared in a shower cubicle. But contractors had been in between time and fixed something in the shower cubicle. So if it's a longer period of time, then it is more difficult, but certainly if it's within 7 days of the checkout, then the inventory clerk should go back and ascertain what the issue is and deal with it accordingly. And then another question from Marie: if a tenant makes amendments to the inventory as an agent and you don't agree with these, what happens as the amendments are documented? Again, really good question. What you must do is, as soon as you get those amendments, is write back to the tenant, say thank you for your email. However, your amendments are rejected on the following basis, and then explain why they haven't been accepted. And it might be something like, you know, you've claimed that the carpets were heavily marked, whereas the photographs clearly show that they were not marked at the time of the inventory. Essentially, Marie, is going to be you relying on your photographs to show that whatever claim they're making is not just. But really important that you know, just because they've made amendments doesn't mean that they stand, but they do stand if you don't show that you've written back to say, no, we're not accepting them. Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the questions and the end of the session for today. So I'd like to take this opportunity. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I hope that you found it really useful. I hope you've all learned something from it. As mentioned at the start, we will be emailing out the adjudication and a recording. And if you do have any more questions, please just email them in. If you haven't got off the mark quick enough, don't worry. Please email them in and they'll be forwarded to me, and I will send you the answers. And thank you very much as well for those of you that have commented to say that you've found the webinar interesting. That's really appreciated. And have a lovely day.